Welcome to the second episode in the three-part mini-series, full of creepy details, on royals who are rumoured to haunt their palaces. Our research has uncovered 5 more spooky haunted history tales, from 3 kings, a duke and a prince. Episode 3 coming next week, and the final instalment in this series is an all-female edition with queens, princesses, and an empress. Sit back, relax, and enjoy these spooky tales. The story of King Edward V, better known as the elder of the 2 princes in the Tower, is one of the most intriguing and heartbreaking mysteries in British history. His disappearance in 1483, after being sent to the Tower of London, has fueled debates for over 500 years. But it hasn't just sparked historical arguments, it's also led to a treasure trove of ghost stories, eerie sightings, and local legends. While historians dig into the power struggle between the House of York and the House of Lancaster, the folklore surrounding this young king looks into the emotional and spooky aspects of his brief life. This tale explores everything from his childhood adventures in the Welsh marches to those shadowy corridors of the Tower of London and the serene churches tucked away in rural Devon. So, grab a comfy seat as we unravel the first tale in this video. A captivating blend of history and ghostly tales about Edward V. When his father died suddenly on the 9th of April 1483, the 12-year-old Edward became the king. His uncle Richard, Duke of Gloucester, was named Lord Protector. What followed was a fast and confusing series of events. Richard took control of the boy king at Stony Stratford. He arrested his guardians and moved him into the Tower of London for protection. Soon after, the young king's brother, Richard, Duke of York, joined him. Parliament eventually declared both boys illegitimate, and the Duke of Gloucester took the crown as Richard III. The boys were seen playing in the Tower gardens during that summer, but as autumn approached, they were seen less and less until they disappeared completely. The disappearance left a hole in the public mind that was quickly filled with stories of murder and treachery. Over the decades, all sorts of theories and tales have emerged, but no matter what people come up with, one thing is certain, that this tale is one of history's enduring mysteries. The Bloody Tower, which was originally called the Garden Tower, took its current name because of the popular belief that the princes were murdered there. Over the centuries, visitors and workers have reported sightings that follow a very consistent pattern. The most common sighting involves 2 young boys, often described as wearing white nightgowns or period-accurate medieval clothing. They are usually seen holding hands and looking frightened. Unlike some ghosts that are reported to be aggressive or scary, the princes are almost always described as lost or pitiable. One of the most famous locations for these sightings is the staircase in the White Tower, where bones were eventually found in the 17th century. People have reported seeing shadowy figures flitting between the rooms of the White Tower and then melting into the stone walls. The consistency of these reports over such a long period suggests that the story of Edward V and his brother has become deeply embedded in the identity of the tower. The yeoman warders, or beefeaters, have lived and worked at the tower for centuries, and they are the main keepers of its oral history. Their stories often include more personal and modern details that don't make it into the official guidebooks. One yeoman sergeant, Phil Wilson, noted that although hundreds of people have died at the tower, nobody has ever been hurt by a ghost. This is especially true for the sightings of the princes, which are treated with a sort of protective respect by the staff. A compelling modern story comes from a warder named Barney. His daughter used to set up her toy soldiers in her room every night before bed. Every morning, she would wake up complaining that someone had moved them. One night, her mother watched as she carefully lined them up facing forward. By morning, despite the door being locked and the girl being asleep, the soldiers were found in 2 neat lines facing each other, as if ready for battle. This story suggests that the spirits of the princes are not just static images, but are still acting out the childhood games they were forced to stop playing when they disappeared. Another warder reported hearing his son talking to someone in an empty room. When asked who he was talking to, the child simply said he was talking with the boys. sightings by children are a common theme in the tower's lore. It is often believed that children are more sensitive to the presence of other children, and the ghosts of the princes are said to feel comfortable appearing to those close to their own age. While the tower is the site of his death, Ludlow Castle in Shropshire was the site of Edward V's life. He lived there for 10 years, from 1473 until the death of his father in 1483. Some historians and local storytellers believe that if Edward's spirit were to go anywhere, it would be back to the castle where he spent his happiest days. Modern pop culture has added to this, such as the Japanese anime Black Butler, which features an episode where the ghosts of Edward V and his brother haunt Ludlow Castle because they are looking for a missing chess piece. While this is fiction, it shows how the connection between Edward and Ludlow is still very much alive in the popular imagination. People visiting the castle often report feeling a presence in the areas known as the Tudor lodgings, where Edward's medieval apartments once stood. One of the most fascinating branches of folklore associated with Edward is the idea that he never died in the tower at all. Instead, some believe he survived and lived a secret life in the Devon village of Coldridge under the name John Evans. This legend says that Edward's mother made a deal with Richard III to let her eldest son live quietly in a remote area on lands owned by her other son, Thomas Grey. John Evans appeared in Coldridge in 1484, having no previous history in the records, and was immediately given the high-ranking job of Parker of the Deer Park. The physical evidence in the Coldridge Church is very strange. There is a stained glass window showing a young man with a crown and a tomb for John Evans that has the letters EVAS carved into it. Some researchers believe this stands for Edward V in sanctuary. There is also graffiti on the tomb that, when viewed in a mirror, supposedly reads the king. The history of Edward V is a mix of fact, speculation, and paranormal belief. From the strict royal upbringing at Ludlow to the mysterious disappearance in London, every part of his life has been touched by the supernatural. The 1674 discovery gave the folklore a physical base, while the Victorian era gave it a visual icon. Today, the story continues to grow, proving that the mystery of the Boy King is one of the most enduring and haunting tales England has ever known. The figures bearing the title of Richard, Duke of York, stand as some of the most prominent sources of ghostly sightings and spooky folklore. This title was held by two distinct individuals, a father who led a powerful faction in a civil war, and a grandson who disappeared as a child, and both have left a deep, spectral imprint on the English landscape. This story explores the various locations associated with these figures, the specific nature of the reported sightings, and the enduring legends that have turned historical trauma into modern ghost stories. Sandal Castle, located just outside the city of Wakefield, serves as the primary focal point for the spooky stories associated with the elder Richard, Duke of York. Once a massive stone fortress overlooking the River Calder, it is now a ruin. But its commanding earthworks and stone foundations continue to be the setting for reports of strange activity linked to the Duke's final days. The most common spooky story at Sandal Castle involves the events of late December 1460. The elder Richard, Duke of York, had retreated to this castle during a winter of intense conflict. The site is dominated by a massive earth mound, which stands over 50 feet high and once supported a great stone tower. Local legends suggest that the atmosphere of the castle becomes particularly somber during the winter months, especially around the anniversary of the battle that took place on the fields below. Visitors and local residents have frequently reported the following types of spooky occurrences. A solitary dark shadow is sometimes seen standing at the very top of the mound, looking out over the surrounding valley as if watching for an approaching army. On cold, quiet nights, some claim to hear the distant, muffled sounds of a great crowd or the clattering of metal, believed to be the spectral remains of the Duke's army preparing for their final ill-fated march. Many people describe a sudden, unexplained feeling of sadness or wrongness when standing on the site of the former gatehouse, which was the last part of the castle the Duke passed through before he was killed. These sightings are deeply tied to the historical mystery of why the Duke left the safety of his high stone walls. He held a position that was almost impossible to capture, yet he chose to march his men down the steep hill into a trap set by a much larger force. Folklore suggests that his spirit is tied to this spot because of the immense regret and confusion surrounding that decision. One of the most famous spooky associations with Richard, Duke of York, is the nursery rhyme regarding a general who had 10,000 men and marched them up and down a hill. While some people link this rhyme to later historical figures, local tradition insists it was born from the Duke's actions at Sandal Castle. In the context of ghost stories, this rhyme is sometimes said to be heard as a faint chanting by those exploring the ruins at dusk. It serves as a reminder of the futility of the Duke's last move, where he abandoned the top of the hill to meet his end on the flat ground below. If Sandal Castle is the site of the Duke's tactical failure, the city of York is the site of his ultimate, spooky humiliation. Micklegate Bar is a massive stone gateway that has stood for centuries as the main entrance into the city from the south. It is a place of grand royal welcomes, but it also has a dark history as a traitor's gate, where the heads of executed enemies were displayed on pikes. After Richard, Duke of York, was killed at the Battle of Wakefield, his head was cut off and brought to this gate. To mock his claim that he should be king, the leaders of the opposing army placed a paper crown on his head before sticking it on a pike at the very top of the bar. They also placed a sign there that said, "Let York overlook the town of York." This gruesome image has fueled ghost stories for over 500 years. The most famous reports include: some people walking the city walls at night claim to see a pale, decapitated figure wandering the ramparts near Micklegate, sometimes appearing to adjust a ghostly, blood-stained crown on a head that is no longer there. Ghost hunters have reported seeing pairs of faint, glowing eyes looking down from the small windows in the turrets at the top of the gate, exactly where the pikes were once held. There is a long-standing local belief that the archway itself carries a curse, and that those who pass through it can sometimes feel a sudden, sharp chill, as if the spirit of the mocked Duke is still venting his anger at the city. The humiliation of the paper crown is seen as a key reason why the spirit might be restless. In medieval culture, the treatment of a body after death was believed to affect the soul's peace, and such a public and mocking display was the ultimate bad death. The most famous and frequently reported ghost sightings associated with the title Richard, Duke of York involved the grandson of the elder Duke. This younger Richard was a boy of only 9 years old when he was taken to the Tower of London. He and his 12-year-old brother, the uncrowned king, disappeared in the summer of 1483 and were never seen alive again, as told about in the previous story of the princes in the tower. Fotheringhay Castle in Northamptonshire was the birthplace of several members of the York family and the favourite home of the elder Richard, Duke of York. Today, the castle has been completely destroyed, leaving only a large mound of earth, but the spooky stories associated with it are some of the most intense in England. Fotheringhay is widely believed to be a cursed location. The castle was the site of so many royal tragedies that it was eventually torn down to the last stone to try and break the cycle of bad luck. The spooky nature of the site is represented by the Queen Mary's tears, a type of thistle that grows on the castle mound. According to legend, these thistles only grow where royal blood and tears have been shed, and they serve as a physical haunting of the ground where the Duke once lived and planned his rise to power. The spooky stories and ghost sightings associated with Richard, Duke of York, both the father and the grandson, represent some of the most enduring folklore in the British Isles. From the grand old Duke marching down the hill at Sandal Castle to the lost princes holding hands in the White Tower, these tales have turned historical facts into a living, spectral tradition. The primary site of Charles I haunting is undoubtedly the Banqueting House at Whitehall. It was here that on the 30th of January 1649, the king was led through a window, or a hole, specifically broken through the wall for the occasion, onto a scaffold draped in black cloth and executed. The morning was freezing, and the king's decision to wear 2 shirts to prevent shivering is often cited in both historical and paranormal contexts as a sign of his immense dignity and the beginning of the martyr persona. This focus on his physical presence and his incorruptible crown set the stage for the specific nature of the hauntings that would follow. Witnesses over the last 300 years have frequently reported a figure in dark, 17th century clothing roaming the hall and the walkways outside the Banqueting House. These reports often highlight the headless nature of the apparition, which aligns with a broader tradition of executed nobility remaining in spectral limbo. In the 18th century, a group of guards stationed near the site described a cloaked figure that drifted toward them and then vanished. Modern visitors still report sudden cold spots and an overwhelming feeling of heaviness in the hall, particularly near the site of the execution. The magnificent Rubens ceiling, which Charles commissioned to celebrate his father's divine right, serves as a poignant backdrop to these sightings, as if the king's spirit is perpetually looking up at the symbols of the power he lost. The trial of Charles I was not just a legal proceeding. It was perceived by many as a ritual leading toward a preordained disaster, accompanied by several supernatural warnings. These omens were recorded by contemporaries and have since become essential parts of the king's spooky legend. Perhaps the most famous omen occurred when the Solicitor General, John Cook, rose to read the indictment against the king. Charles, who did not recognize the authority of the court, tried to stop Cook by tapping him on the shoulder with his silver-tipped cane. When Cook ignored him, Charles struck him so forcefully that the ornate silver head of the cane broke off and rolled across the floor. In a moment of high drama, no one in the court moved to pick it up, forcing the king to stoop and retrieve it himself. To the onlookers, this was a clear sign that the king's head was about to fall, and that his royal authority had already been severed. The identity of the man who wielded the axe remains one of the great mysteries associated with the king's death. Both the executioner and his assistant were heavily disguised in masks, wigs, and false beards to prevent them from being recognized and later punished. The executioner's refusal to utter the traditional cry of "Behold the head of a traitor" is often cited as proof of his fear or his professional, clinical approach to the act. Folklore has suggested everyone from Oliver Cromwell to a French specialist was behind the mask, and this faceless figure has himself become a minor phantom in the stories surrounding Whitehall. Oxford served as the royalist capital during the war, and Christ Church College became the king's home and parliament for several years. It is widely believed that the king's ghost returned to Oxford because he felt a deep affection for the city and the college that stood by him when London turned against him. The ghost at Christ Church is frequently described as a restless figure that appears in the Great Hall and the cathedral. Unlike the Whitehall manifestation, which is often headless, the Oxford sightings typically feature the king with his head intact, though he is consistently portrayed as a shadowy presence seeking solace or resolution. Visitors walking through the Great Hall, where the king once dined and held court, have reported a sudden, bone-deep chill or the sight of a figure that vanishes as quickly as it appears. In the cathedral, witnesses have heard faint sighs and muttered words, interpreted as the spectral echoes of a man still burdened by the decisions that led to the collapse of his reign. One of the most elaborate and intellectually fascinating legends involving Charles I centres on the Bodleian Library. During his residence in Oxford, the king was denied permission to take books out of the library, as the rules prohibited any volume from leaving the building, a rule that applied even to the sovereign. In what is seen as a ghostly act of rebellion, his spirit is said to haunt the upper reading room at night. The book-searching legend claims that the king's ghost runs from shelf to shelf, pulling books down, reading a single line, and then replacing them in a never-ending cycle. Windsor Castle is the final resting place of Charles I, but his journey to the grave was as fraught with strange events as his trial. The burial in St. George's Chapel is a cornerstone of royal folklore, primarily due to the weather on the day of his funeral. When the king's body was carried toward the west end of the royal chapel on the 9th of February 1649, the sky, which had been clear, suddenly filled with snow. The blizzard was so intense that by the time the coffin reached the chapel, the black velvet pall was completely covered in snow. The vault containing Charles I was opened in 1813 during the reign of George III, leading to some of the most gruesome and fascinating accounts in royal history. The Prince Regent and Sir Henry Harford discovered the king's body in a marvellous state of preservation, looking much as he did in his portraits by Van Dyck. However, as they inspected the head, the change in air pressure reportedly caused one of the king's eyes to pop. Harford took a piece of the fourth cervical vertebra, the one severed by the axe, as a relic. This bone was kept by the Harford family for generations until Queen Victoria heard of it and was so appalled that she had it reinterred in a separate box next to the king in 1888. Many believe that the sightings of the king's ghost at Windsor, particularly in the Garter Tower and the cloisters, were most active while his remains were incomplete. Charles was a prisoner at Carisbrooke Castle for 14 months before his trial, and the site is thick with the folklore of his failed escapes and the subsequent tragedy of his children. The king's attempt to escape through his bedroom window is a legendary part of the castle's history. He believed that where his head could pass, his body would follow, but he famously became wedged between the iron bars. Today, a phantom in historic clothes, often called the Stuart Spectre, is seen in the gatehouse and near the rooms where he was held. The ghost is said to embody the frustration and hopelessness of his final imprisonment. The vast array of ghost sightings and folklore associated with King Charles I suggests that his death remains a live issue in the British psyche. The consistency of the stories, the headless wanderer of Whitehall, the book-searching scholar of the Bodleian, and the White King of Windsor, speaks to a figure who cannot be contained by history alone. For those who believe in the paranormal, he is a spirit trapped by a violent and unjust end. For the folklorist, he is a symbol of a nation divided against itself, a doomed monarch whose story continues to captivate because it reminds us of a time when kings could literally lose their heads. Whether he is searching for justice, his lost library privileges, or simply an end to his roaming, the ghost of Charles I remains one of the most enduring and poignant figures in the haunted history of the British Isles. The reign of King John, which lasted from 1199 to 1216, is frequently remembered as one of the most turbulent periods in the history of the British Isles. While historians focus on the political strife, the loss of continental territories, and the signing of the Magna Carta, a parallel history exists in the form of folklore and ghost stories. These accounts, which have persisted for over 8 centuries, place King John at the centre of a vast network of supernatural sightings. From the windswept ruins of Tynemouth Priory to the sturdy stone towers of Limerick, the spirit of this monarch is said to linger in the places where he lived, campaigned, and eventually died. This story examines the specific locations, the nature of the sightings, and the enduring spooky stories that link King John to the paranormal world. One of the most enduring legends associated with King John concerns the loss of his royal treasure in the area known as the Wash. This vast estuary, located between the counties of Norfolk and Lincolnshire, was once a treacherous landscape of shifting sands, dangerous tides, and thick mists. In October 1216, during a period of civil war, the king was moving his court and baggage across this area. The tide rose unexpectedly, or perhaps the guides took a wrong turn, and the entire train of wagons, horses, gold, and the crown jewels was swallowed by the mud. Spooky stories about this loss have haunted the local communities for generations. In the marshlands of Norfolk and Lincolnshire, people have reported hearing the sounds of heavy wooden wagons creaking and horses splashing through water on foggy nights. These auditory hauntings are often accompanied by a sense of deep dread. It is said that the cries of the men who were caught in the rising tide can still be heard when the wind blows from the east. The treasure itself has become a ghostly object. While many have searched for the gold and jewels, they remain hidden beneath the silt. Some local legends suggest that the treasure is protected by a curse, and anyone who comes too close to finding it will experience sudden, unexplained misfortune. A particularly frightening sighting occurred in the early 20th century in the vicinity of the Wash. Several people claimed to have seen a towering figure in armor wandering through the mists. This apparition was described as having a terrifying presence, carrying a large broadsword and appearing as a shadow against the grey sky. In one extreme case, a local man was found with wounds that looked like they were made by an ancient sword. Before he passed away, he claimed that the ghost of the king had attacked him. In his pocket, a coin from the year 1216 was allegedly found, adding a chilling layer to the story. Newark Castle, often called the Guardian of the River Trent, is the site where King John's life came to its dramatic end. He arrived at the castle in October 1216, already suffering from a severe illness. The events surrounding his death have created a lasting spectral footprint in the building's ruins. On the night he died, a violent thunderstorm is said to have broken out over the town of Newark. The storm was so fierce that chroniclers of the time described it as the devil himself coming to claim the king's soul. This story has led to a belief that the castle is a place where the barrier between our world and the afterlife is thin. Visitors to the castle grounds after sunset have reported hearing the sound of thunder, even on clear, starry nights. Following his death at Newark, the king's body was taken to Worcester Cathedral for burial. Because he was worried about his many sins, he requested to be buried in a very specific way to try and trick his way into heaven. The story goes that the king ordered his body to be dressed in the clothes of a monk, a cowl and habit. He believed that if he arrived at the gates of paradise looking like a holy man, he might be allowed in despite the bad things he had done during his life. When his tomb was opened centuries later in 1797, investigators found that he was indeed buried wearing a monk's cowl. This trick has led to many ghost sightings in the cathedral. A figure, dressed as a monk, is frequently seen walking near the high altar and the tomb of the king. However, unlike the other monks who might be seen in the cathedral, this spirit is said to have a very different energy. Visitors describe the apparition as appearing restless and unholy, often vanishing the moment someone tries to approach it. The tomb itself is a source of spooky reports. Some people claim that when they take photographs of the royal effigy, strange, shadowy forms appear in the pictures that were not visible to the naked eye. Others have reported hearing the sound of eerie chanting or the rustle of heavy robes when the cathedral is empty. In Ireland, the fortress built on the banks of the River Shannon in Limerick is one of the most famous sites associated with King John. Constructed around 1210 on his orders, the castle was meant to be a symbol of his power in Ireland. Today, it is known as one of the most haunted buildings in the country. The most famous ghost at the Limerick Castle is known as the Black Lady. She is described as a beautiful woman with long golden hair, dressed in fine black robes. She is typically seen on summer evenings as the sun begins to set. She walks along the top of the towers, looking out over the city and the river. Some believe she is a spirit from the king's court who was left behind or died during one of the many sieges the castle endured. At the entrance to the castle, near where the heavy gate would have been, a ghostly soldier is often spotted. He is known as the Gatehouse Sentinel and is said to appear most clearly during a full moon. He is described as wearing a metal breastplate and a helmet, standing perfectly still as if he is still guarding the castle for his king. On the eastern coast of Ireland, the town of Carlingford is home to another King John's castle. The monarch stayed here for a few days in 1210, and the building has been linked to his name ever since. The ruins of the castle in Carlingford are said to be haunted by the spirits of medieval knights. These spectral knights are often seen in the moonlight, appearing as shimmering figures that move through the stone arches. Local stories tell of a great jousting tournament that took place during the king's visit, and some believe the ghosts are the champions of that event, who never truly left the grounds. There is a particularly sad story about a knight who was imprisoned in the castle's dungeon during the monarch's stay. Because of a dispute over a marriage, the knight was left in a dark cell without food or water until he died. Since then, a figure in full armor has been seen walking the halls and stairways of the castle at night. It is said that the owner of the castle at the time was so haunted by these visions that he could never sleep peacefully again. One of the most detailed and spooky stories about King John comes from Tynemouth Priory in the north of England. This story dates back to 1224, several years after the king had died. A monk at the priory was lying in his bed one night when he suddenly woke up to see the spirit of King John standing before him. The king was dressed in his imperial robes, which appeared to be made of a brilliant, glittering fire. When the monk asked how the king was doing, the ghost replied that he was suffering worse than any man. The ghost explained that the beautiful robe he was wearing was actually an unbearable weight, heavier than any living person could ever lift. The glitter of the robe was a constant fire that burned him as punishment for the things he had done in life. The king told the monk that he had appeared to deliver a warning to a bishop who had been his partner in many bad deeds. He wanted the monk to tell the bishop that a seat in hell had been prepared for him unless he changed his ways immediately. To prove he was really the king, the ghost described a specific ring he had once given to the priory as a gift. He also talked about a private conversation he had once had with the bishop that no one else could have known about. This story is one of the most famous medieval ghost stories and shows how even people in the 13th century viewed King John as a haunted figure. King John's ghost stories and spooky associations create a map of his life and his many failures. From the moment he lost his treasure in the Wash, to his final breath in Newark and his monk-disguised burial in Worcester, his spirit is portrayed as one that is constantly searching for something it can never find. The historical memory of Prince Rupert of the Rhine is unique because it combines real military history with some of the most famous ghost stories in England. During his life in the 1600s, people were so afraid of his skills in battle that they began to believe he was using magic. This belief did not disappear when he died. Instead, it turned into many different ghost sightings and spooky stories that are still told today in the places where he lived and fought. From the old streets of Shrewsbury to the quiet fields of Marston Moor, the ghost of the prince is said to remain a powerful and sometimes scary presence. It is important to look at how his spooky reputation started while he was still alive. He was a very tall man, standing about 6 feet and 4 inches, which made him look like a giant to many people at that time. This physical size, combined with his success as a cavalry leader, led his enemies to spread rumors that he was not an ordinary human. The most famous part of his supernatural story involves his white hunting poodle named Boy. The prince received this dog while he was a prisoner in a castle in Linz, Austria. The dog was a gift meant to keep him company during his 3 years in prison. When he was released and came to England to fight for his uncle, the dog went everywhere with him, even into the middle of dangerous battles. Because the prince and the dog were so close, people who were against them began to say that the dog was actually a familiar spirit. In case you don't already know, a familiar is a kind of demon that helps a witch. Shrewsbury is a very old town with many dark corners and medieval streets. The Prince Rupert Hotel is located in a part of the town called Butcher Row, which is famous for its timber-framed buildings that look like they have not changed in hundreds of years. The hotel is actually made up of several different historical buildings, including a 12th century mansion house where the prince stayed while he was raising an army to fight for his uncle. The most reported spooky experience in the hotel happens in the Prince Rupert suite. This is the room where the prince is said to have slept. Many guests who stay in this room report an unseen presence. They describe a feeling of someone heavy sitting on the edge of the bed in the middle of the night, even though no one can be seen. Some people believe this is the spirit of the prince himself, still watching over the town he once defended. The story of the magic dog came to a very sad and spooky end at the Battle of Marston Moor in 1644. The prince had tied the dog up safely at his camp because he knew the battle would be very dangerous. However, the dog managed to break free and ran onto the battlefield to find his master. Tragically, the dog was killed during the fighting. The enemies of the prince were so happy about the dog's death that they wrote even more pamphlets about it, claiming they had finally killed the devil dog. Some said the dog was only killed because a soldier used a magic button or a silver bullet, because regular bullets would not work on a magical creature. This event is still remembered as one of the most famous and spooky moments of the war, and the heavy atmosphere at Marston Moor today is often blamed on the ghost of the dog and the many soldiers who died there. Prince Rupert of the Rhine was a man of many talents. He was a soldier, a scientist, and an artist. However, his legacy in England is forever tied to the supernatural. The spooky stories about his magic dog and his ghostly appearances at old hotels and battlefields show how much he frightened and fascinated the people of his time.